Hi. All right. I think we are ready to get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marguerite Easterbrook. I'm the president of the West Village Chorale, and I'd like to thank you all for being here virtually today. This is our 49th summer presenting Summer Sings, but it's our first year doing them from our living rooms. Truly, this year has turned out to be like no other. But we're so excited to be able to continue with our Summer Sings tradition, and we have an incredible lineup for the next 8 weeks. We look forward to the day when we can convene over choral music and snacks in person at our home at Judson Memorial Church, but until then, we're hoping this series will allow singers to stay engaged during the separation from our individual and collective choral families. The West Village Chorale is happy to offer these weekly sings free of charge, though we are grateful for any donations offered to help us cover the cost for the series. In these uncertain times, any amount is greatly appreciated. On a technical note, a quick heads up, the chat feature will be disabled during the sing, but the Q&A feature will still be active. So if you have any questions, please feel free to direct them to the Q&A portions at the bottom of the screen. All right, now on to tonight's sing. We are so thrilled to have Maestro Phillip Cheah conducting for the 11th year, kick off our very first digital summer sing of 2020 with the Brahms Requiem. Phillip Cheah is the music director of Central City Chorus, music director of Amuse Singers, and the co-artistic director of the Cheah Chan duo. Maestro, thank you for being here today. Please take it away.
Thanks, Marguerite. Welcome, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yes? Cool. I'm so glad to be here with all of you tonight. And as Marguerite said, this is my 11th summer sing with everybody. And I'm really excited to be back to do this. It's also our first virtual summer sing, mine as well. So please bear with me as we sort of explore this new territory. I've been telling people that this is not so much a sing as a sing along, which is kind of the best thing we can do virtually. You will be singing, of course, but what we'll do is we'll basically have a recording that I'm curating for you to sing along to. And along the way, if you have any questions, as Margaret said, you can use the Q&A function to let me know if you have stuff you want to ask me. So I want to start. So a lot of this sing is going to be, because we're not able to interact at all, it's going to be me sort of talking about this piece and giving you some sort of background information, which I would do so in a minute. And then we'll do a really quick warm-up, which is going to be odd because I can't see anybody or hear anybody, so I just assume that you'll be doing this at home. And then we'll go through each movement. I would talk a little bit about the musical stuff, and then we'll play the recording and you can sing along. I'm going to ask people how many of you have not done this before, but you can also say this in your Q&A. Stacey Horn just asked, will we hear each other? No, unfortunately. The problem with any online platform is once you unmute everybody, it's cacophony. It's this lag. So unfortunately, you'll only be singing to yourself. So think of it as singing in your bathroom with 125 other souls singing along with you in one of the most amazing pieces on earth. So I want to start by reading a quote from Brahms. First in German and then in English. Was den Text betrifft, will ich bekennen, dass ich recht gern auch das Deutsch fortlese und einfach den Menschen setze. As concerns the text, I must admit, I would very happily also omit the German, in quotes, and simply put human, also in quotes. Now, the piece, as you know, is called Ein deutsches Requiem, a German Requiem. The full title is Ein deutsches Requiem nach Worten der Heiligen Schrift, a German Requiem to the words of the Holy Scriptures. And the German in this case is not so much about the German people, but the fact that it's in German. the fact that Brahms had mentioned this, the quote I just read to you was Brahms writing to his the conductor who would conduct the Bremen performance, and telling him that even though he's titled the piece a German Requiem, he would gladly substitute German for the word human. And I just wanted to mention that I think of all the pieces to begin this summer sing season, and also with everything that's happening in the world, I can't imagine a better work to start than with a work like this Requiem, which is written not so much like requiems to talk about the departed and instill the fear of God in those who have left, but really a work to console the living, because when people are gone, they're gone, but we're the ones left behind to pick up the pieces. And I think with everything that's happening right now in the world, I can't think of a better piece than one that consoles us in these difficult times. This work is very humanist in many ways and non-Christian. Christ is never actually mentioned once throughout the entire piece, even though his words are used. So that's something that to bear in mind when you sing this piece. Jackie, I don't know, well, we can't see each other, but that's part of the setup for tonight, so sorry about that. This piece was not written as a commission, so Brahms was writing this piece purely to fulfill his desire to articulate what he wanted and needed to express. It is radical that Brahms did not use the Latin liturgy, but rather had to invent his own format and compile his own texts from Luther's Bible. The only other piece I can think of right now that is very similar to that is Britain's War Requiem. So I'm going to start sharing a screen. So tonight I'm going to be sharing my screen with you so you can see the score. I'm also going to have some little tidbits of information to share with you as we sing. Here is... Oh, Liam, I can't share my screen, so could you help me with this? Ah, there we go. Thank you. All right, here we have Brahms, whom you all recognize, this gruff old man in his late 50s. But here's this handsome dude who wrote this piece in his 30s. Brahms was only 33 when he began working the piece, pretty young to be writing a requiem. And he was possibly influenced by the deaths of both Schumann, his mentor, in 1856, and also his mother in 1865. The work was introduced over 4 performances. There wasn't just one premiere, if you can believe. I mean, there was an actual premiere of all 7 movements, but the work actually came about through like 4 different presentations. The first one was in 1867 in Vienna, with only just the first 3 movements, and this is the program from that first ever performance of the piece. You can see I have highlighted below here, Drei Sätze aus ein deutsches Requiem, 3 movements from the German Requiem for solo, chorus, and orchestra, manuscript, and the first time, Zum ersten Mal. This was the infamous performance where the timpanist misread the ending fugue, and instead of seeing FP, he played FF, so the timpani covered the fugue at the end of the 3rd movement completely. So this was the very, very first performance in 1867. And then 6 movements, basically all the movements we know today minus the 5th movement, were performed in 1868 in Bremen. And then the 5th movement, the solo movement with soprano, was performed by itself in 1868 in Zurich, of all places. And then finally, all 7 movements were performed in Leipzig in 1869. The Bremen performance, I just wanted to point out, was pretty interesting because, like I said earlier, Brahms doesn't include Christ in his text, and the text is his own compilation of biblical texts. So there was a lot of consternation about the theology or lack thereof in the work. So the Bremen performance actually included slow movements from the Bach Violin Concerto in A minor, as well as arias and choruses from both the Bach St. Matthew Passion and Handel Messiah, including the Hallelujah chorus and Worthy is the Lamb. So you can imagine what kind of concert that was. I want to point out 2 more things before we start to warm up and I start playing music and going through the movements. The piece begins with a pedal. This is the opening of the piece. I'm hoping you can all hear this. But you hear bom bom, that pedal. I've highlighted it in here as well. There's only one other piece of Brahms that actually begins with a pedal. And I know this because this was one of my questions that was asked for my graduate entrance exam for grad school in college. I would ask people, but I can't see anybody. So the answer, if you know it, is actually the opening of his first symphony, Symphony Number 1 in C minor, which begins like this. So you can hear the influence of the pedal. Now, the symphony was written about within 8 to 10 years of the Requiem, so clearly that was also part of his thinking doing that. But it's very striking that these two pieces, the German Requiem and also the First Symphony, both begin with this big, long pedal in the bass. And the final thing I want to mention to you, which you may already know from having done this piece in the past, is that this amazing work begins and ends on the same word, selig. Selig is German for blessed, and I think it's very telling that he chooses to bookend a piece of his own invention, both the format and the work, with the words blessed. And I'll come to that a little bit later on, because the selig that you begin the whole piece is very, very important, and it permeates the whole piece as we go through. All right, let's do a quick warm-up. I'm just going to stop the share so you can see me. Oh, Evie, pedal is literally, as the name implies, it's a note that underpins the whole piece. So in the beginning of the Requiem, you've got the basses in the orchestra going bom bom bom, and then right. So you hear that. And so in the opening of the First Symphony as well, you hear that long pedal note. So that's what a pedal is. You're very welcome. All right, so let's begin with a quick massaging of the face. Loosen your tongue. And a little lip buzzes. I assume you're doing this because I'm only hearing myself doing this. But I guess we're all hearing ourselves doing this by ourselves. And let's start with, let's start going up. Let's go. Z, A, R, N. And here. I'm learning of keys. A few more. I'm playing my iPad, which is why this is so badly played on my part. Two more. Last one. All right, we went up all the way up to the C sharp. I'm playing on my iPad, this piano, which is why it sounds so terrible. I apologize for that. Let's go down quickly. Let's go zing, 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 za, and Zing, 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 zing. One more. And last one. Zing, zing, zing. And 2 more lip buzzers. All right. That was the weirdest warm-up I've ever done, and I think we can all agree on that. Just checking the chat. Cool. I am not tapping my foot. No, I'm. You're probably hearing me tapping my keys on the iPad. So, all right. Movement 1. I'm going to share the screen. So, a few things to mention. I mentioned this Selig that opens and closes the piece. So, if you can see in this document right here, I've highlighted the opening. Selig sind, which also sounds like the opening of the humming chorus from Madame Butterfly. Never mind, ignore me. So this up of the third and then up a half step is a theme that appears throughout the entire work, and you can see in this document how he's transformed things. As you can see here that. This opening Selig sind becomes this whole line, and then that passage comes after that in the sopranos, where he inverts it. Instead of Selig, you go Selig sind, right? So that's kind of what he's doing, and you see this throughout the whole piece. And as we go through each movement, I'll point out things to you. For example, in the fourth movement, when you hear ba bum 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 bum, that ba bum bum is the theme inverted. So I just wanted to take note of that theme. I assume most of you have sung this piece, so I will talk as if you have sung it, but I'm also just going to go through some of those sections. There are 3 big sections in this opening movement, from this opening page through this page 5, and then on page 4, and then page 5 begins this new section. I've highlighted parts here so that you can actually see when entrances are needed to come in for that. And then finally, the last section begins on page 8. On this section, and I just want to point out that in this section at letter E, the instruments take the choral line, bum 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 bum, and the altos and tenors sing an accompaniment, the bass line as it were, which is one of those magical moments I think of the entire piece. So just something for you to take note when we do that. Before we begin singing, I realized I failed to mention one thing. Because this piece is anywhere between 65 and 85 minutes long, it's a pretty long piece, I was told to select movements so we can keep it within an hour plus. So we'll be doing every movement except for the third movement and the fifth movement. So you'll get your Brahms Requiem, most of it in there, but I think those 2 movements are the 2 that I thought we could do without for tonight. So if you're a big fan of the third and fifth movement, I apologize, but there it is. So, all right, here is movement 1 of Ein Deutsches Requiem. I have selected for you 3 recordings actually, but I am a huge fan of performance practice, so I've chosen John Elliott Gardiner's recording with the Monteverdi Choir from 2012, as well as Phillip Herrewege's recording from 1999, I believe. And then there's also a third recording which I'll be playing for you later on. I'll talk about that because I think it's pretty interesting for you to know. So here is movement 1. All right, everybody, that was movement one of this amazing piece. I wanted to share with you, I was told by our panelists, that we have 153 participants tonight, which is a really amazing number. So thank you so much for all of you for turning out for, again, our very first summer sing and our very, very first virtual summer sing. I know this is not exactly the same format. Nothing is going to be the same as singing together. But I think the fact that we're all connected and here tonight, virtually, but connected in one place and connected by Brahms with his piece, I think is just one of those amazing and magical things that we can do. So thank you again for being here tonight. All right, for the next movement, movement two, one of my favorite ones. So I just wanted to point out a few things. Brahms did not really do much change at all, really, to the text. He made two word changes, believe it or not. And the first of which is actually in this title. So all of you know the text, "Denn alles Fleisch, es ist wie Gras." But the original text in the Bible is actually "Denn all flesh is like grass, denn alles Fleisch ist wie Gras." There is no S in "denn alles Fleisch, es ist wie Gras." So Brahms actually added the word S into that. It really serves no function grammatically. So why, you ask, did Brahms do that? And he did it because the opening of the piece in the first movement, when you've got the pedal, and the cellos come in on sorry. That bum 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 is actually, believe it or not, an opening. There are debates, scholarly debates, as to exactly which hymn or chorale that Brahms is quoting from or adapting, but it's definitely an adaptation of a chorale, and Brahms himself had in his famously sarcastic style, mentioned that. So the reason I mention this because the tune that you sing in the second movement, which I will bring up here right now, "Denn alles Fleisch, es ist wie Gras," that bum, 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 in minor key, it's really the opening outline of that chorale theme that you hear in the cellos. So scholars have imagined that in setting the text, he needed to add S to "Denn alles Fleisch, es ist wie Gras" to make it work in the chorale. Whether it's true or not, we don't know. Unless we have a seance, I guess we can't ask Brahms. But it's certainly interesting that Brahms made this change in the word. It's also very telling that in the autograph score, which is this picture that you see right now, it's hard to see, I've highlighted this, but he writes, "Denn alles Fleisch ist wie Gras." In all his autograph scores, he titles them exactly as written, "Denn alles Fleisch ist wie Gras." So I thought that's something that's interesting to note when you sing this. I mentioned earlier the Selig theme, your Selig sind. So you see it here in the opening. And it goes on, obviously, but it's the Selig theme that's inverted there. It also comes in the trio. So seid nun geduldig. So when you get to this passage here on "Bis auf die Zukunft," you hear it. That bum 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 on "Bis auf die," that's again the Selig theme right there. So it's literally everywhere. It's like the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. You can't run away from it. So a few quick things to point out musically, if this piece is new for you. If it is, congratulations. I can't imagine a better way to jump in, to just, sing along with people virtually in the recording. So on this page 19, letter H is the transition to the new section, which begins the fugue theme. My professor in college called this the big but, because you have this big aber, but the word of the Lord remains forever, which I think is such an amazing sentiment. And then, as I mentioned before, I've highlighted your entrances in the fugue so you can have a sense of who should come in and when. But I also wanted to point out on this page, page 23, when we get there, there's a stretto entrance. It's just a fancy word for meaning piling on top of one another. You can see how the theme of the fugue bum ba bum ba bum ba bum comes in the instruments, and then the voices come in, but they come in one after the other. So sopranos come in, and then tenors, and then altos, and then basses. It's like a duel for who can come in loudest and correct. It's always the tenors who think they do it, but it's really not. So, but anyway, so just be aware of that entrance that comes in. And then the last thing I want to point out for you is on the coda on page 26 in the score. The theme is carried in the instruments. You can see I'm circling right here on my mouse the instruments, and then the voices come in on ewige Freude, eternal joy, which is just the most amazing. It's like a chorus of angels singing ewige Freude. But the thing I wanted to point out actually, which I don't know if people have mentioned before, is throughout this whole coda until the very end, you can see in the piano reduction, the timpani is playing this constant eighth note passage, bum, 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 softly at first, and it never fully gets too loud until the end. But it permeates the entire coda. And I mentioned that because, to me, it foreshadows the end of the third movement, which we will not sing, unfortunately, tonight. But at the end of the third movement, remember I mentioned in the very first performance of the three movements, the timpanist misread the directions, and he played fortissimo the entire time. The end of the third movement, the big fugue, ends on this giant tonic pedal on D with the timpani playing triplet the entire time. And the text that's sung at the end of the third movement is the souls of the righteous are in the hands of God and they will be saved. I'm paraphrasing. But the timpani in the end of the third movement represents the constancy of God, the immutability of God holding you and providing you comfort and solace. It is one of the most amazing moments, I think, to have this timpani be a manifestation of God's solace and salvation. And I think the timpani here at the end of the second movement, with using ewige Freude, is a foreshadow of that. It's exactly the same musical idea, and I have to imagine that this is the underpinning of the divine as you sing joy, joy, joy all the time. So that's my spiel for the second movement. I hope that some of that was new to you. And if it wasn't, then you've sung this piece many times and you've had great instructors teaching about this. So here. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong things. My apologies. All right, that was movement two. I apologize for this shift in the page sizes. I was getting some suggestions that they needed to see more of the score, which is why I switched to the full screen. And then a bunch of you said, no, no, please make it bigger. So that I went to make it bigger. So I'm just going to stick with the bigger version of the score. I think that seems to work best for most people. So we'll go with that. So we're going to skip movement three and move on to movement four. Just a few things to mention here. This is the only movement that has no reference to death, misery, or suffering. So, in other words, yay! Something happy and uplifting after all this stuff about, people dying. What I want to mention for this movement actually has nothing to do with the movement at all per se, but I mentioned early in this thing that I'm going to play a bunch of different recordings. The next recording I'm going to play actually is what is known as the London version of the Requiem. This is Brahms's own piano four-hand arrangement, meaning one piano, two pianists playing on the same piano, which is actually not a reduction or a piano vocal reduction, but it is actually its own arrangement that stands on its own, and it actually omits the vocal lines originally. What you see here before you is actually Brahms's autograph copy of the piano four-hand version, and you can see right here as my mouse, an editor has put in the text of the vocal line just to give it some reference, because you can do it without singing. The reason for doing this was back in the day, mounting orchestral concerts was not a cheap or easy endeavor to have. So the easiest and best ways for composers to get their pieces heard really was to do these piano four-hand arrangements. If you're a pianist, you've probably at some point in your life, if you haven't do so, played a piano four-hand arrangement of a Beethoven symphony, a Liszt. I mean, all these composers have made piano four-hand arrangements of symphonic pieces because those were the easiest ways to get them heard by people in general. And so Brahms did the same thing too. And it's interesting to note that not long after he wrote the Requiem, the next big piece that comes in his oeuvre are the Liebeslieder Walzer, the ones for piano four hands and four soloists or chorus. And if you've done those pieces, you know what they sound like. The reason I'm playing this version is because, in a regular summer sing, you'll just have a pianist playing. But I also wanted to at least let you hear this version, which was actually premiered in England, of all places. The first performance in England was actually a performance with the piano four-hand version, and also Brahms' sanctioned translation in English. You're like, what? A German Requiem in English? Unfortunately, that translation has been lost, although Robert Cheah, the great Robert Cheah, has made an English translation of the work, which I've show you here. This is the fourth movement that he's done. And he wrote it for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Unfortunately, he passed away about a week before they were scheduled to record this. But it has since been recorded, and there's a recording of this with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, with Craig Jessup, the current director. Sorry, the previous director, and you can find that on Amazon if you wish to sing that. The last thing I will mention is that Brahms was actually his publisher had tried to persuade him to do a Latin translation of the Requiem, and he goes, "Well, it wouldn't be a German Requiem if it was in Latin." So he thought that it should be left to be sung by the language of whoever's performing it. And he actually said that he felt the English text would fit more easily with his piece. So here is movement 4 of Brahms Requiem with the piano four-hand arrangement. If you are a Central City Chorus member, I know a bunch of you are in this thing right now. Welcome. This is the version that we did, 10 years ago. Okay, movement 4. What a sweet movement. I hope you heard the Liebeslieder influence, or rather, that how this influenced Liebeslieder down the road in a few years. Last two movements for the night, movement 6 and 7. Just quickly. Movement 6 is the first mention in the entire piece of the word death, Tod. Those of you who know the piece will know the very dramatic entrance of Tod, wo ist dein Stache? Death, where is thy sting? And going back to the first performance of the six movements minus the fifth movement. So in Bremen, where the first full performance, as it were, of six movements. This is the end of the fourth movement. What we just did was how that ended. There was a break, and Joachim, the famous violinist, then started playing the slow movement of the Bach A minor violin concerto, as well as some other pieces by Schubert and Schumann. Then the next piece that followed was the sixth movement. So I pointed this because the fourth movement just ended on E flat major. The next chord you hear is G major, which is related to this, but what makes it even more amazing is that Brahms makes this opening modal, meaning so the F natural instead of F sharp is an F natural. So we have from end of fourth movement to the opening of the next movement. It's almost very modern sounding when you think about that. So something to think about. It is 8:35. You know this piece. Let's just sing it. Wow. I don't know about you, but I'm breathless just even listening to that and singing along too. Finally, our last movement. I always thought that the what we just heard was the perfect ending. And I've always wondered why Brahms would add another movement to that when he could just end it there. But I think the seventh movement, more than just a postlude, is actually one of the most astonishing and heart wrenching movements that he's written. I just want to point out just two quick things, and then we'll sing. As you can see in the opening, the that bum 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 again in the bass. You've got the Selig sind theme here, and of course when you come in sopranos and later on tenors, Selig is the ending of the first movement is an inversion of the Selig theme, but then it becomes this new theme for you in the seventh movement. The last thing I want to mention, and you may have heard this from others before, Brahms. I keep saying Bach because I'm going to say Bach soon. Brahms was a huge student of the past, and he's at this point studied Schütz and Bach. Schütz had wrote the Musikalisches Exequien, a German sort of funeral piece, and it was in some ways the very first German requiem, if you will. So Brahms's piece is actually in many, many ways modeled after the Schütz. He even sets the same text, Selig sind die Toten, in this last movement, and also Die mit Tränen in the first movement. But I want to mention that the opening of this Brahms piece, the Feierlich, sounds a lot like the opening to the last movement of the first part. Opening of the last movement of the first part of the Bach St. Matthew Passion, O Mensch bewein dein Sünder groß. Here is the Bach, just to hear it. So you've got this pedal note and then ba da ba da ba da ba da, right? Now slow all that down and transpose it, and you get. I mean, I don't know about you, but the resemblance is completely too much to be a coincidence. So knowing how much Brahms revered Bach and studied Bach and counterpoint, it is no coincidence, I think, that the opening of the last movement of the first part of Semi the Passion is in there. Also, Feierlich means solemn in German, and it was very typical to have this sort of solemn last movement in a piece, as you heard from the Bach. So I hope that was something new to you, and if it wasn't, that again, you've had great teachers teaching you this piece. Here is the final movement of the Brahms Requiem. And we end as we began on the word Zayli. Thank you so very much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to do this for you. I want to invite Marguerite back to give some closing remarks. Thank you so much for all your comments and support. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, Philip. Thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you for such a beautiful evening with, beautiful music. And to our audience and our participants, thank you so much for tuning in to our very first digital summer sing. This is an evolving format, and we would love to hear your feedback. So we will be sending out a survey and welcome any comments. Please be on the lookout for that email and fill out the survey when you are able. We really hope that you enjoyed your evening and consider making a donation to the West Village Chorale. And have a great week, and we hope to see you here next Monday. Thank you guys so much for everything. And thank you. Phillip. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.